The sound of the knock at my front door was ordinary at first. Just another neighbor stopping by, I thought. But there was something in the tone insistent, almost demanding. I looked through the peephole and froze. It was Karen. The woman whose reputation in the neighborhood was already legendary for complaints, chaos, and over-the-top demands. But this time, it felt different. Dangerous. I hesitated. My gut screamed that this wasn't a casual visit. Karen was holding a thick stack of papers, fanned out like a deck of cards, and her eyes were burning with an intensity I had never seen before. "I'm the new owner," she said, her voice sharp and condescending. "Hand over your keys. Now." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. My house, the place I had poured years of sweat, love, and memories into, was allegedly hers. I laughed nervously, hoping sheer disbelief would make her leave. But Karen wasn't laughing. She had a plan, and it was unfolding right in my living room. Or at least, she thought it was. "I think there's been some mistake," I started, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline racing through my veins. "This is my home. I've lived here for over a decade. There's no way you..." Before I could finish, her phone was out. "I'm calling 911. I own this house, and this trespasser refuses to give me my keys," she declared, turning her phone toward me like a weapon. I could feel the panic start to rise in my chest. My neighbors were starting to peek out their windows, drawn by the confrontation. I realized in that instant that this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. Karen had weaponized the law, or at least the appearance of it, to intimidate me. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that if I backed down, the nightmare would only begin. But I refused. I refused to give her the keys. I refused to let her dictate what was mine. I refused to let fear take over my life. Little did I know, that single act of defiance would trigger a chain of events that would involve my neighbors, the police, legal battles, and a level of chaos that no one could have predicted. By the time the sirens started in the distance, I knew that my life and my house would never be the same again. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the houses on our quiet street. Karen's triumphant smirk widened as if she had already won. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. One thing was clear, the police were about to arrive, and I needed to control the story before it spun out of control. Karen held her phone tightly, muttering her version of events into it like a practiced actor. "They're refusing to give me my keys. I'm the owner. You have to do something." Her voice carried into the street, and soon neighbors were peering from windows, some whispering, some pointing, others clearly shocked. The scene was escalating quickly. Then, the first patrol car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, badges glinting in the late afternoon sun. Their presence should have calmed me, but instead, my stomach sank. Karen was already gesturing wildly, waving papers in the air. "See? This is proof. They're trying to steal my property," she shouted, her voice shrill. I knew I had to act fast. "Officers, please listen. This is my home. She's making false claims. I have deeds, utilities, everything in my name," I said, keeping my tone steady, hands slightly raised to show I wasn't aggressive. The officers approached cautiously, sizing up both of us. Karen was still in full performance mode, her arms flailing, voice rising. The neighbors started whispering louder. It was chaos, yet somehow surreal, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself had hardened. One officer finally asked Karen for her proof. She handed over her papers, but the officer's expression immediately shifted to suspicion. "These are unusual. We'll need to verify," he said carefully, giving me a small nod. My pulse began to slow, a flicker of relief sparking inside me. Karen, however, was relentless. She wasn't going to give up. She started pacing in front of the house, muttering threats and accusations under her breath, and glancing at the officers like she expected them to snap to her side. I could see the tension in their faces. They were trying to navigate the thin line between law enforcement and not getting dragged into someone's personal war. At that moment, I realized something critical: this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. Karen was clever, aggressive, and absolutely unafraid to manipulate the situation. The fight for my home wasn't just going to be a conversation. It was going to be a battle: legal, emotional, and psychological. The officers radioed back to the station, likely verifying documents, while Karen fumed and muttered about injustice. And as I watched her frustration mount, I understood one thing with chilling clarity: the nightmare had only just begun. By the next morning, word of the confrontation had spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered behind curtains, exchanged worried glances, and some even knocked on my door with cautious sympathy. Karen, ever the opportunist, had apparently called everyone she could think of to proclaim herself the new owner of my house. Flyers, social media posts, and heated group texts suddenly made my peaceful street feel like a battlefield. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my coffee cup, feeling the weight of the previous day. My phone buzzed constantly: friends, family, and even a few concerned neighbors reaching out. But buried among the supportive messages were unfamiliar numbers delivering terse threats. Some claimed legal action, others demanded I vacate immediately, and one particularly menacing text warned, "You won't see this house the same way again." The first official letter arrived mid-morning. It was thick, stamped with the law firm's insignia, and screamed intimidation in bold letters: notice of claim of ownership, immediate compliance required. I could barely believe it. I read it 3 times, hoping I'd misinterpreted the words, but there was no mistake. Karen had lawyers, paperwork, and now, what seemed like unlimited audacity. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I called my attorney, explaining the escalating situation, the police involvement, and the flood of threats. She listened carefully, her voice calm but firm. "You did the right thing refusing to hand over your keys," she reassured me. "But we need to prepare for Karen's next move. She's trying to intimidate you, and that counts for something legally. Keep every text, every call, every flyer. We're building a defense." As I hung up, I glanced out the window. Across the street, Karen paced with the same intensity she had shown the day before. Her gaze swept over my home, her expression half triumph, half fury. I realized she wasn't just fighting for ownership, she was waging psychological warfare. Each glance, each gesture was calculated to make me second-guess myself. Then came the neighbors' subtle but painful backlash. One homeowner casually mentioned they were worried about neighborhood disputes, implying I had somehow brought chaos upon myself. Another whispered that perhaps cooperation with Karen might be the easier path. The isolation hit me harder than I expected. The very people who shared my street now seemed unsure who to trust. Yet beneath the fear and frustration, a flicker of resolve ignited. This was my home. My life. And no amount of manipulation, legal threats, or neighborhood gossip would make me hand it over. I knew one thing for certain: to survive Karen's assault, I would need strategy, courage, and By midweek, it became clear that Karen wasn't content with just legal threats and public intimidation. The moment I stepped outside, I noticed subtle but unsettling changes. My garden gate, usually locked and sturdy, had been tampered with. The latch wobbled in a way it never had before. My neighbor's cat, normally friendly, hissed and ran past, as if sensing the tension in the air. It felt like someone was watching every move I made. Then came the notes. Tiny scraps of paper slipped under my door, on my car windshield, even tucked into the mailbox. Each one carried a single, chilling message: "This house is mine." Some were typed, some hand-scrawled, jagged letters like claws. Each note pushed my anxiety higher, a constant reminder that Karen's reach was relentless. One evening, I returned home to find my front porch lights smashed. Not accidental, the deliberate force, the shards of glass glinting in the dim light, screamed intention. I called the police immediately, but they could only take a report and leave. Karen wasn't overtly violent, yet her presence had become a form of psychological warfare that was impossible to ignore. Inside the house, every phone call from unknown numbers made my stomach twist. Emails flooded my inbox, threatening lawsuits, fines, and eviction. Even my attorney admitted she had never seen a case where someone escalated so quickly from legal threats to constant intimidation outside the courtroom. Karen's determination to claim my home wasn't slowing, if anything, it was intensifying. Neighbors, meanwhile, became a new battlefield. Some whispered as I walked by, their eyes filled with fear or pity. Others avoided me entirely, clearly unsure whether to side with me or the woman whose bold claims had thrown our street into chaos. It was isolating, a lonely war in the place I once felt safest. Despite the fear, I refused to surrender. I started documenting everything meticulously, photos of tampered locks, shattered lights, threatening notes, even the timing of suspicious phone calls. Every shred of evidence became a weapon in a war I had never wanted but could not walk away from. I realized that surviving this wasn't just about proving ownership, it was about maintaining my sanity in the face of relentless harassment. That night, I lay awake listening to the faint creak of my front door. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a potential threat. Karen's campaign of intimidation had transformed my home into a fortress, and myself into a reluctant soldier. But one thought kept me awake with clarity: I would not give in. Not now. Not ever. By the following week, Karen's tactics had reached a new level of audacity. Legal letters arrived daily, each more aggressive than the last. She claimed everything from backdated property transfers to fabricated contracts that supposedly gave her full ownership. Each envelope felt like a physical attack, a constant reminder that this fight was far from over. My mailbox, once a simple receptacle, had become a battleground. Then came the confrontation. Karen appeared on my street at midday, waving one of her many legal notices like a flag of victory. She had somehow convinced a few neighbors to gather, all murmuring about supposed legal rights she possessed. My usually quiet street had become a stage, and I, unwillingly, the main character in her drama. I stepped outside, keeping my voice calm but firm. "This house is mine. You have no claim here," I said, hoping reason might cut through the chaos. Karen scoffed, ignoring the officers who had been summoned by a concerned neighbor. "The law is on my side," she declared theatrically. "You're just in denial." Her words were loud enough to carry across the block, drawing more neighbors to the scene. Some watched silently, wary of stepping in, others whispered about taking sides. I realized quickly that this confrontation wasn't just about me or my house, it was about perception. Karen was trying to rewrite reality in front of everyone, to make my home appear as if it were hers by sheer force of will. I called my attorney, who advised me to remain calm and let the police mediate. Documentation mattered more than arguments. Every conversation, every interaction, could be a crucial piece of evidence in a legal battle that was shaping up to be both complicated and exhausting. As I stood there, I noticed something unsettling. Karen was recording everything. Her phone, held aloft like a weapon, captured every word, every gesture, every attempt I made to assert my rights. Social media posts were sure to follow, painting me as the aggressor despite the clear evidence of her harassment. It became clear that winning this fight would require more than legal knowledge, it would require strategy, patience, and endurance. I wasn't just defending a house, I was defending truth, sanity, and the sanctity of my life. As the officers mediated the standoff and the small crowd began to disperse, Karen muttered under her breath, promising that this wasn't over. And I realized with a sinking feeling that she was right. This was only the beginning of a fight that would stretch far beyond my front porch and into courts, newspapers, and the very heart of our neighborhood. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. I walked in, papers clutched tightly in my hands, trying to focus on the facts, the deeds, and the proof that this house was undeniably mine. But even as I took my seat, I could feel the weight of Karen's presence. She entered with her entourage, her lawyer, a few neighbors she had convinced to testify, and her phone, ever ready to record. The judge called the session to order, and Karen immediately launched into a dramatic statement. "Your Honor, I am the rightful owner of this property." The defendant refuses to acknowledge the law, refuses to comply with the paperwork, and is deliberately trying to withhold what is legally mine, she said, her voice dripping with self-assured authority. I stayed silent, letting my attorney speak on my behalf. She presented the deeds, utility bills, and every piece of documentation showing the property had been in my name for over a decade. Each page was a shield against Karen's claims, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to win over the judge and jury with theatrics instead of facts. Karen's strategy became evident quickly. She interrupted, shifted narratives, and painted herself as the victim, claiming harassment and threats from me. Every time I spoke, she would scoff, roll her eyes, or whisper something calculatedly to the court clerk or spectators. It was exhausting just to watch, and I realized that winning this case would not just be about legal evidence, it would be a battle of endurance, perception, and strategy. Outside the courtroom, the tension didn't dissipate. Karen's social media posts spread like wildfire, portraying me as aggressive, uncooperative, even dangerous. Neighbors who had once supported me now asked cautious questions, wondering if there was some truth to her narrative. The isolation I had felt earlier intensified. I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was fighting. This wasn't just about a house, it was about standing firm against someone who believed rules didn't apply to them. Every step, every document, every witness testimony was another layer of defense against her relentless manipulation. By the end of the day, the judge scheduled hearings and requested further verification of Karen's claims. It was a small victory but a critical one. As I left the courtroom, Karen's glare followed me, silent but filled with unspoken threats. I knew this war was far from over. That night, I sat in my living room, listening to the faint echo of the day's chaos, and realized one hard truth: Karen wasn't just trying to take my house. She was testing how far she could push me, and I needed to be prepared for her next move, whatever it might be. After the first round in court, I hoped for a temporary reprieve, a chance to catch my breath. But Karen had other plans. The harassment didn't stop at legal letters or courtroom theatrics, it spilled into every corner of my daily life. It started subtly. Car tires slashed, my mailbox rifled through, garden plants uprooted. At first, I hoped it was coincidence or neighborhood mischief. But then came the calls, unknown numbers, static-filled voices whispering threats. Some called repeatedly, hanging up just as I picked up. Others left messages claiming to be friends of Karen, warning me that resisting her would be costly. The psychological pressure was relentless. Even mundane tasks became nerve-wracking. I couldn't step outside without wondering if someone was watching, if Karen had another stunt planned. Grocery runs, morning jogs, even the walk to the mailbox felt like navigating a gauntlet. My home, once a sanctuary, felt like a battlefield. Then Karen shifted to personal attacks. Rumors started circulating, fueled by her social media posts and whispered conversations with neighbors. She painted me as aggressive, unstable, even dishonest. Friends and acquaintances I had trusted began asking questions, worried about getting caught in the crossfire. The isolation I felt deepened. The neighborhood, which had been my community, now seemed like a stage for Karen's manipulation. One evening, I returned home to find another note, pinned to my door with a mocking smiley drawn in red ink: "You can run, but this house will be mine." Forever. My pulse raced. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a declaration of war, a promise that she wouldn't stop until she achieved her goal. Despite the fear, I knew giving in was not an option. I documented everything meticulously: photos of damaged property, copies of notes, phone records of threatening calls, and social media posts. My attorney advised me to maintain evidence for both the court and potential police action. I also began installing cameras, extra locks, and security measures. Every precaution felt necessary, yet insufficient. Karen was not just a legal adversary, she had become a shadow over every moment of my life. Late at night, as I sat reviewing the day's evidence, I realized the fight had transcended the courtroom. This was no longer just about proving ownership. It was about reclaiming control over my home, my safety, and my life. Karen's campaign was a test of endurance, a challenge to my resolve. And deep inside, I knew the next moves would be even more audacious. By the time Chapter 8 of this nightmare arrived, I was exhausted, but I couldn't afford to show it. Karen's harassment had escalated beyond notes, rumors, and tampered locks. Now it was more brazen, more invasive, and designed to break me mentally. One afternoon, I returned from running errands to find the front door wide open. Nothing appeared missing, but the air felt wrong, heavy, tense, as if the house itself had been violated. My security cameras revealed the truth: Karen had been inside. She had no right, no legal authority, yet there she was, striding through my living room like she belonged. The footage showed her flipping through papers, taking photos, and smirking at the camera as if daring me to confront her. I called the police immediately. Their response was sympathetic but cautious: trespassing on someone else's property without intent to steal is difficult to prosecute, especially when she claimed she had ownership rights. It was maddening. Karen had found yet another loophole to intimidate me without facing serious consequences. As the days passed, her psychological warfare intensified. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood, branding me as the resisting tenant and warning that anyone who supported me would be liable for aiding an unlawful occupant. I was being framed as the aggressor, my credibility under attack from every angle. Even my friends and neighbors started questioning my version of events. The isolation was suffocating. I had to make a choice: retreat and protect my sanity, or fight harder and risk further escalation. Retreat wasn't an option. This was my home, my life, and years of memories, everything Karen sought to claim through manipulation and fear. I fortified my home, contacted my attorney again, and prepared evidence for the next court date. Every note, photo, and video clip was catalogued meticulously. I also began keeping a daily log of Karen's actions, times, and witnesses. I realized that if this escalated further, these records might be the only thing that could protect me from false claims or legal traps. But as I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset, I felt the full weight of the battle. Karen had pushed me to the brink physically, mentally, and emotionally. Yet something inside refused to break. Fear might make people surrender, but determination made people endure. And in that moment, I promised myself, no matter what Karen tried next, I would stand my ground. The nightmare had reached its peak intensity. But what came next would test every ounce of courage, strategy, and resilience I had. The final court date arrived like the eye of a storm. Months of stress, harassment, and sleepless nights had built to this moment. Karen walked in with her usual bravado, papers stacked high, phone in hand, ready to film and manipulate the narrative one last time. But this time, I was prepared. I had evidence, witnesses, and a strategy that couldn't be ignored. The judge called the session to order. Karen immediately launched into her performance, claiming ownership, accusing me of obstruction, and exaggerating every interaction. I felt a surge of irritation but forced myself to remain calm. My attorney presented the case clearly: the deed in my name, years of utility bills, mortgage records, security footage showing Karen trespassing, and a meticulously kept log of every incident. Each piece of evidence dismantled Karen's narrative. The judge, initially patient but skeptical of her theatrics, began to shift visibly. Her smirk faded as the proof piled up. Even the neighbors she had rallied seemed uncertain now, murmuring quietly instead of shouting in support. Then came the moment of reckoning, the security footage of Karen inside my home without permission. The room was silent as the judge reviewed the video. Karen stammered, trying to explain it away, but it was impossible. The evidence was undeniable. She had crossed every line, both legally and morally. After hours of testimony, evidence review, and tense arguments, the judge leaned back and spoke with authority. Based on the documentation, the legal property deed, and the evidence of trespassing and harassment, it is clear that the ownership of this house belongs to the plaintiff. Any claims to the contrary are dismissed. Relief washed over me, though I remained cautious. Karen's expression was a mix of fury and disbelief, but she had no legal ground left to stand on. The nightmare, the constant anxiety, the sleepless nights, they had finally reached an end. Outside the courtroom, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized was crushing me. Neighbors approached cautiously, some apologizing for believing Karen's earlier claims, others simply offering supportive smiles. For the first time in months, I felt my home as mine again, truly mine, not just in deed but in peace of mind. I returned home, walking through the door with a sense of victory and quiet triumph. Karen would not dictate my life, my safety, or my home. I had faced intimidation, false claims, and relentless psychological warfare, and I had endured. Standing my ground had not only preserved my house but my dignity, my confidence, and my peace. This ordeal had been brutal, exhausting, and terrifying, but it had also taught me one unshakable truth: courage, preparation, and unwavering determination can withstand even the most relentless attempts to steal what is rightfully yours. My house was safe. I was free.